So by way of introduction, my name is Cody Erickson. I am currently a cloud architect and team lead over both IT and cloud or web development at Firefly Automatics. We do automated turf equipment. We have a fully electric autonomous golf course mower that we had here last year to let people hack. Maybe we'll do that again in the future. I have a little consulting, startup, Iota Cloud Solutions. I am looking for cloud consulting partnerships, trying to get my name out a little bit. And I'm also a STEAM education advocate and volunteer. I've done a lot of work with schools around here. I sit on an advisory board with the Cache County School District for a program called CAPS, which is a mentorship system for students to do real world work. I've also done a lot of things like Raspberry Pi after school clubs and even lobbying with some state senators and stuff on getting more STEAM money into education. It's something that I'm really passionate about. Talked about the passion. I've just always had it for tech, for technology. I've always ripped things apart. I've always just been the family geek. And that has given me a lot of opportunity to give help to my family over the years. And I have a big Mormon family. I'm 7th generation Utah. My mom was one of 12. So I have a lot of aunts, a lot of uncles. So I am curious, who has had this text message or something like this? Family member writes you and says, hey, something's happened. I've been hacked. Something's gone wrong. And you're the only one that I know to really reach out for help. So I got this from my aunt, and I went into, what I do best. I gave her a help desk quality response, just like I would if this was anybody at work coming to me. I gave her some instructions. I said, call your phone carrier. Make sure it wasn't a SIM swap. I didn't consider that she had no idea what a SIM swap is, right? I told her, change your email passwords ASAP. Something she ought to know. Change any other passwords that might be the same as your email passwords. Her response was, why would it not be the same? And then use Bitwarden, to keep your passwords. Again, why would it not be the same? She had one password that she knew. She'd been using it for 20 years. She was super familiar with it, never forgot it. So this wasn't really helpful. I'm going to get into my feelings on this a little bit more, but I don't think this was all that helpful. Not for a family member. This was perfect for a frontline, L1 kind of response. Next, I want to introduce you to Staff Sergeant Ken Army Guy, trying to preserve his anonymity a little bit here. Kent Army Guy, right out of high school, he enlisted. He worked for the military police in the U.S. Army. He did that for 4 years. He then got out and he worked for a security firm. He was a bodyguard for a member of the House of Saud. And he was a personal bodyguard, like for the guy. If you're familiar with the House of Saud, anybody named Prince Faisal is pretty important. And then he later got back into the Army. He joined the Utah Army National Guard. He did deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He served as a quartermaster. His job as a quartermaster was to secure the supply lines for his unit in an active war zone. A lot of the supply lines are electronic and digital. So the point I'm trying to make with this about this guy is that he knows security. He knows how to be safe. He knows how to protect himself and others. He got forced into retirement eventually, both military and civilian. He found that he had no purpose. He found that life was a little bit boring and that, he wanted to add something. He wanted to feel useful again, right? So Ken Army Guy is my dad. We were sitting at dinner one day and he told us, I got a job, guys. It's a little part-time thing just on the side. And he was really happy about it. He was real excited. Turns out that job was a mystery shopper gig for Western Union. He was to take money wire it, go back and fill out a report on the overall experience, and then that money would be reimbursed, right? It was his own money that he was supposed to do this with. It'd be reimbursed, and then he'd get paid. Well, of course, he never got paid. My sister, who was there at dinner, she's a banker. It's her job to educate people on these kinds of scams. And she just blurted out, "Dad, you got scammed." And his face fell. We all kind of piled on. I was like, you shouldn't do that. You should have known better, right? Then the third, my other aunt, she was a victim of a romance scam. I don't know anything about it other than it happened. I heard it from her son, my cousin, and I tried to ask her if there was anything I could do. She didn't want to talk about it at all, completely denied it. But she lost quite a bit of money, more money over this romance scam than my dad lost on the MoneyGram scam. So I want to borrow a phrase from AWS and say that we have a shared responsibility for security. And I'm not talking about shared responsibility with the providers like AWS. I'm talking about with people in our personal lives, with our family members, with our friends. And I'm going to make a little bit of case for this responsibility before we get into what I call the Hacked Ant protocol. Right. First of all, the ACM Code of Ethics. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I hadn't until I was researching this. They've been around for a while, but they have a code of ethics on how professionals should respond who work in the computer industry. And there's some really good things about this. They have some really good guidelines, such as respecting privacy, making sure that you're always trustworthy. Really good things for a professional to do. But one of so section 1.1 says, contribute to society and to human well-being, acknowledging that all people are stakeholders in computing. So whatever you feel about having a code of ethics to follow, the idea that as a professional with this knowledge, we should have a responsibility to those who don't, because we are the ones who are creating the risk. When I say we, I mean us as a whole. We're creating this risk. We have the responsibility to secure it for those who don't have the understanding for it. Secondly, there's overlapping risk. How many of you live in a house where there's somebody else who uses a device that you use? Anybody with kids, you have a Switch or a PlayStation, you have shared family computer, they're shared, they're on the same network. Those are people who are opening security holes in my network. And so it's my responsibility to ensure that they don't do things they shouldn't, right? And then again, but the final one is cutting off the supply. The reality, and I'm going to get into this quite a bit more here, is that every cybercrime that happens funds another cybercrime. And you start with the low-hanging fruit, the people who are really easy targets, who also have more money than other targets. It's a great way to fund your next criminal venture. So I found this study that was done several years ago on how cyber criminals spend their money. I thought it was kind of interesting. I found some contradicting numbers as well, but this was just one study, and I liked it. So they start, 15% on immediate basic needs. This is probably what you think of as your low-level criminal. They're just trying to pay the rent with the money they scam, right? And then those who go into disorganized, hedonistic spending, right? They buy their drugs and sex and stuff with their ill-gotten gains. 15% buy status and luxury items, your Rolex, your nice cars, things like that. 30% buy property and other tangible assets, probably the smarter guys there. And then another 20% is reinvested in further criminal activity. Now, I've seen numbers that are up to 30%. 20 to 30 seems to be about typical for reports on this money going back into their criminal enterprise. Now, preparing for this talk was a lot of fun because I got to dig into a lot of statistics. None of them agree. None of them, no matter what source you go to. They are all completely different. So I have kind of some rounding numbers and stuff, but I wanted to do a little kind of thought experiment here and look at just some numbers so that we have an idea of the kind of money that we're potentially talking about here. So in 2024, this is according to the FBI, and these are 60 plus people. There were 147,000 complaints, $4.885 billion in losses for those complaints. So, and this is just in the US, just the 60 over demographic. Okay, this was a 46% increase from 1 year. That is an astounding number. 43% increase in losses. So 46 on the complaints and then on 43% on the total losses. Only 7,500 of them lost more than 100,000, which means that 140,000 or so of those were less than 100,000, were smaller amounts, which we'll see why that's important in a minute. Now, there's a lot of, like I said, it's hard to get these numbers, and there's broad estimates and there's different sources. So the FTC and one of those bureaus of something or other, they look at insurance reports and fraud complaints to banks and things like that, and compare that with the criminal numbers to come up with these estimates they have. And you can see that, almost 2 billion were reported lost, but their estimate is anywhere from 7 to 61 billion. I mean, you might as well not even report a number if you're going to have that kind of a range, right? Oh, I got some of my little slides here. So, the range 27% to 3% is what's reported. The rest of it is completely unreported. Now, if we take this model, and then I have some updated numbers for 2024, and I applied them here. So 2024 changed to 4.8 billion, still with that same range. Our top number is 158.8 billion instead. So we're going to take this middle number, like the median of those right there, which is 18.25 billion. And we're going to play with that number just a little bit here. So I found this other one talking about cybercrime ROI, the return on investment on different kinds of crime. And this is actually well reported. There's several different supporting sources for this. And they find that phishing by far is the most effective, cost-effective way to make money using cybercrime and these other ones. So that's our number. We're going to take that 735. So first of all, our 20% that was reinvested, last year, that would have been there was a total loss of 88 billion. So the 20% of that is 17 billion roughly. If all of that was invested into phishing and had the same ROI, I mean, this is, outrageous numbers here. But that's $12.96 trillion potentially that could be feeding criminal enterprises or nation states, right? There's a reason North Korea does this stuff. Right? For reference, 88 billion is the GDP of Lithuania, 17 billion is the GDP of Kyrgyzstan, but 12.96 trillion would be the combined GDP of Germany and Japan, or it would be third after China. So potentially a lot of money. Now that was a little extreme example there that I wanted to just use to kind of illustrate the point that if we can close off or squeeze off any of that supply, we're doing a bigger net good than we think. Now, when we're talking about the 60 plus community, there's a number of reasons why they are so commonly targeted. Obviously security literacy. My aunt didn't know what any of those terms I used were. If I said to her, make sure your browser is secure, she has no clue what that means, right? She doesn't know what HTTPS is. Generational trust. I probably don't need to say a whole lot more than that. There's an idea of respect for authority that's just not as prevalent and strong as it was. This ties into, what's the term for coming back? Repeat victimization. Right. Tech overload. There's just too many changes. I feel it. I'm only in my 40s and I already feel like an old geezer and a curmudgeon because I have boxes of old tech that's obsolete anymore. And it's just a constant barrage that we get. It's something we have to accept. Social isolation, loneliness. my aunt was pretty lonely. Made her a prime target. Cognitive decline. Might not. People have talked about this may have been a factor. Right? Financial attractiveness. This is the demographic that has savings accounts. They have 401ks. They have pension. They have more money than your average 20-year-old, out on the street. Okay? And they also have a reluctance to report. The embarrassment. Those 3 situations I talked about, not one of them was reported to law enforcement at all. And I'm going to highlight that one just a little bit here. Why the reluctance to report is such a problem. So this was from a study that was done purely in the UK, a little bit smaller numbers, but still, I was really fascinated when I saw this chart come up. So what surprised me was first that the younger demographic is re-victimized at the same rate that they're victimized, but the discrepancy between here and here really surprised me. I thought this was going to be way up here. The reality is that there's smaller number of victims of occurrences in the 60+ community than there is because there's fewer of them, because there's fewer of them online. There's just fewer targets, but they are bigger fish. And that's what we see with this. They are big targets, and they get re-victimized because of that. If somebody was successfully scammed out of $100,000 once, they're going to be successfully scammed out of $100,000 again, most likely. That's what this shows anyways. Victims often remain silent due to embarrassment or fear of being ridiculed, which increases their vulnerability to further exploitation. So I found this Victims' Bill of Rights. There's a law about it that says how the victim of a crime should be treated. And there are certain things that you not only expect, these are rights that you have. And while preparing this and trying to come up with this idea for a protocol that we can follow to help people, I thought it would be really important to figure out how to minimize that shame and that embarrassment. Unfortunately, the Victim Bill of Rights kind of covers that a little bit, right? So the first thing is they have the right to protection. They have timely notice, meaning anything that goes on, they're allowed to know about right away. They have the right to presence, to be in any proceedings, to be heard, to give their voice in any proceedings that happen, to have consultation with attorneys, with prosecutors, things like that. Right to restitution, to expedited process, and to fair treatment. Now, the reality is, since most of these cyber crimes do not go reported, nobody's claiming their rights in this. Restitution doesn't happen unless prosecution happens, right? But the one right that I can help my family claim here is the fair treatment. When I am helping them, when I am serving as their front line of defense here, I can make sure that I'm not shaming them, that I'm treating them with respect and dignity and privacy. Now, I really feel like in those 3 instances with my family, I didn't give them anything worthwhile. I didn't really help. My first aunt, I ended up mostly turning her over to her company's IT. It's kind of their problem anyways. My dad, we basically just shamed him and left it at that. He called me over a couple months later, said, I need help with my computer. I went over there and it was just not working. It was a mess. No post at all. Really? Okay, I'm going to go into fast forward mode here. He deleted everything on his computer that he didn't recognize. He got so paranoid as a result of that. He deleted the System32 folder because he'd never seen it before, right? That's a problem. So I want to give you guys the Hackdamp protocol. This was the meat and potatoes, and I'm going to rush through it. So just to relate a little bit, this last year, I was in a car accident, a pretty terrible one. And I went through the whole experience of recovery and rehab and rehabilitation. And I thought that that would be the beginnings of a wonderful framework for cybersecurity response here. Since we're short. So I decided to take and build this, think of this as a standard operating procedure. I'm a manager. I don't really do hands-on cybersecurity much these days anymore. I oversee those who do. So I'm not here to give any technical advice on specifically what you should do. I'm here to present a standard operating procedure and some overall guidelines. Following this medical process, most of us have either been through this or we know somebody who has, so it should be kind of familiar. We watched enough ER to know these steps. And I'm suggesting that when we're helping people, we take on these roles individually. So first, we want to stop the bleeding. We want to make sure that we disconnect things. We turn off devices. This is just your immediate first response. Make sure the data is not egressing any longer. Block any access, just revoke any tokens, the high priority ones. Like this is just your first pass, right? And then also preserve the evidence in case if it's a crime, we need to keep evidence, right? But also will tell us how to help later. Triage comes next. So this is, once you get to the ER. This was the worst part for me going through my accident. Honestly, all of the scans and the being hauled around and poked and prodded and all that. And it's really hard here as well. But what we want to do is we want to find out how they got in. What do we need to fix to keep it from happening again? Remember, re-victimization is what we're keeping in mind here that we want to prevent. After that, we want to map the damage and then prioritize our response. After that, we go into the repair and recovery. This is, what the surgeon does. We want to make sure that we regain full control of all of the email accounts and all of the access. We want to shut any doors, make sure nobody else can get in. This is deeper than the first, incident response. We want to be thorough here. We want to clean the system, and then we start filing reports. We preserve the evidence before. This is where it comes in useful. This is when we call the cops. This is when we talk to banks and all of that. And then the really, really key part is we want to keep it from happening again. This is where I was turned over to my primary care doctor, said he just had surgery in this big accident. So we want to make sure that further things don't happen. No blood clots or any of that did. And so this is where the digital housekeeping comes in. Get rid of any old accounts that they don't need. Reset Wi-Fi passwords, things like that. And then stay alert. Education at this point is paramount because this is where recovery scams, people calling up saying, I'm from the IRS. I understood you were just scammed a little bit. We want to help. Give me your information, right? Those things are super common. That was that big orange bar is that kind of thing. And how often do you think about that as a risk? I'm sure that the people we're helping have no idea that that even happens typically. Finally, we want to rehab and strengthen. This is the exercise to make sure that it doesn't happen again anymore, any new things. This is where we educate on MFA. A point about MFA, we start using that right away and implement it. Make sure you're using the right MFA for the person you're working with. Make sure that it's commensurate to their ability and their understanding. Again, understanding is important. We have to educate why MFA is important. MFA and password manager for this demographic are the two key takeaways, right? But also things like call before you click, having bookmarks of your bank website, things like that, and make sure that they know this is the safe place to go. You follow these bookmarks, you call this number exactly, not the one in the email. We set up any credit freezes or other safety nets, anything behind the scenes that's going to help. And then, of course, we build confidence with more education. I can't emphasize that enough, that at this point, our role is education. Understand why it happened. So, that is my HackDamp protocol. Again, I want you to think of that as a standard operating procedure, just a general guideline. These 5 steps are probably pretty easy to memorize and just jump into action whenever you need help. We can do this. We can keep that 12.6 trillion from getting out there and all that. So thank you very much.